Hi, this is Boki, and today I want to try something new. I want to start a new series that I'm calling STEM Syllabus. On this channel, I talk a lot about not just books and not just grad school, but kind of the world of science and academia and engineering. But I also kind of want to highlight the things that I've read and the things I've listened to or watched that have really kind of shaped my ideas about these things. I want this to cover kind of a number of different topics, things that are like both about the culture of science and representation or politics, but also things like discoveries that might be interesting to people. Things like, what is genetic engineering? If you have specific requests for things that you might want to see on this, definitely let me know and I will try to get to them in the future. Right now, because my schedule is kind of like rough, I'll probably only be doing this about on a monthly basis, but I'm hoping that once my schedule kind of loosens up, I can do this more frequently. I will link to all of these articles and podcasts and videos below. Today, I actually wanted to start on a topic that I have discussed a little bit before in my diversity in academia video, and this is sexual harassment in STEM. The gender disparity in STEM is pretty well known. The prevalence of women in a lot of fields is really, really low, and that can lead to a lot of kind of toxic environments where women are taken advantage of and subjected to treatment that's not really respectful. I'm going to highlight 5 different things. There are going to be news articles and podcasts that I think kind of have really influenced my ideas about sexual harassment in STEM and that have also challenged them as well. So the first one I'm going to start off with is an article by Azeen Ghorayshi, who is a writer at BuzzFeed. And I talked about her articles in my original video, but I want to highlight them again because I think her writing is so important. The article I'm going to link to below is the first article about Geoff Marcy that she wrote, who was an astronomer at Berkeley, who really recently found to have violated several sexual harassment policies at Berkeley and has since resigned. The reporting that she does is really important for highlighting kind of the really tough position that female astronomers were in if they were considering working for them, because he is someone who can advance their career as they're trying to get into a very male-dominated field, but who's also simultaneously taking advantage of them. But Azeen Ghorayshi has written about a number of sexual harassment cases, not just Geoff Marcy, so I recommend reading through a lot of things that she's written. She's done follow-ups on him, how even though he resigned, he's still a professor emeritus at Berkeley. My second recommendation is a video/podcast. You can either watch it or listen to it, put out by the MIT Comparative Media Studies, which is a panel about sexual harassment and gender equity in science. This features Azeen Ghorayshi, astronomer Sarah Ballard, who was one of the women who came forward against Geoff Marcy, a professor of history and science at Harvard, Evelynn, Hammonds, and it was moderated by Christina. So this podcast/video, it really takes the stories that you read in Ghorayishi's articles and extends them into even more of a discussion on the culture that makes these toxic environments possible and so enduring. And it also kind of gets into the individual experience of either coming forward with your own story or writing about them. Just overall, this panel has so much great conversation and ideas and questions. I think it should really be kind of standard listening to or watching to for anyone who wants to learn more about sexual harassment in science and engineering. So my next 2 recommendations are also going to be linked together. So number 3 is the blog entry written by Susan J. Fowler, who is an engineer at Uber. It's a long but very thorough detailing of her experience at Uber as an engineer. During her time there, she had a manager who made pretty clear advances to her, and when she complained was basically told, like, you know, this is the only complaint that's been made against him and he does pretty well, so, you know, we'll just give him, you know, a pass. And then she later found out that no, that was not the only time a complaint has been made against him. There are these clear, like, harmful issues of, like, sexual harassment, and then there are things that sound, like, inane, but the fact that they're inane, like, makes it worse. There's this whole issue of, like, company leather jackets that weren't ordered for the women because there aren't enough of them, that, like, on the surface it's like, what a, you know, that's like not a big deal, it's leather jackets, but, like, the fact that that's an issue is part of the problem. And my follow-up to that is an episode of the podcast called Too Embarrassed to Ask, which is put out by Recode, which is a news site about technology. And they have this whole episode about kind of these issues at Uber. Johana, Bhuiyan, Swisher, and Goode, they talk about the culture at Uber and how hostile of an environment it could be. I think one part that really stood out to me is that at the end they take listener questions, and one of the questions is from a man who's asking, if I see a coworker being harassed, what should I do? And I think that's the kind of discussion that like I don't really think of, because I'm always kind of more on the defensive position of like, how do I make sure nothing bad happens to me? But I think that kind of thing is really like a really necessary conversation to have. So for my last recommendation, I want to highlight an article from Racked about the company Thinx. So Thinx is a company that puts out basically period underwear. I kind of consider this company at the interface between fashion and technology. I think it's really taking sort of an engineering approach to a bigger world problem, having good underwear for when you're on your period. And so Rack's article is about Thinx's former CEO, Mika Agrawal. They basically talk about how this feminism that's at the core of Thinx's message didn't necessarily extend to employees. And while this first article doesn't really focus on sexual harassment, it's more about issues like maternity leave and payment and like health insurance. There is a follow-up article that talks a little bit about specific sexual harassment allegations. All of these issues really seem to come from Mika Agrawal and her approach to running the company, which is very much a no boundaries, I'm gonna say whatever I want. And I wanted to highlight this article for a few reasons. Even in the way that I introduced this topic, we talk about sexual harassment as very much an issue rooted in gender disparity. I think that's completely true. I think the gender disparity plays a big role, but I think it's important to note that just because you resolve issues of gender disparity does not mean you resolve the issue of people who create toxic work environments. I also want to note that the harassment that I've talked about in pretty much all of these articles and videos and podcasts targeted towards cis women, but there are groups that are even more underrepresented and that have to deal with even more fucked up bullshit. One of the follow-up Racked articles, there's a link to a thread from Tyler Ford. So Tyler Ford is a non-binary trans person who worked with Thinx originally with the intention of modeling for them, because Thinx was having this kind of like event to highlight their intersectionality, and unfortunately Thinx treated them pretty shittily. They treated them to a lot of invasive transphobic questions. They also basically were really dismissive of them and treated them like token trans characters. Even though these articles and podcasts and videos are not necessarily like lighthearted fare, I hope that they are really helpful to kind of give a bigger picture about the cultures that make sexual harassment prevalent in kind of the STEM world. If you've also read things or have suggestions for other readings that you think are really relevant, not even necessarily in science, definitely let me know below. And if you have, like I mentioned before, if you have requests for certain topics that you'd like me to cover in future STEM syllabi, let me know below as well. So thank you for watching, and yeah, bye!